We first noticed Asher was having difficulties with learning when he was about 5. We ended up having him privately tested, and of course it came back that he was dyslexic. It was super overwhelming. Like there was just list and list of all these programs. So we started talking to people and felt like everybody was just saying something different. I hired the lady that had tested him. She tutored him for a year, one-on-one, 4 days a week. She came to me and was like, it's not working. Thankfully, she had met Dr. Conway. She just highly suggested the Morris Center. From there, my husband and I got in touch with the Morris Center, and Dr. Conway spoke with us over the phone, and you could just really tell his expertise in dyslexia.
Enroll your child or teenager at themorriscenter.com, or for virtual sessions, visit nowprograms.com.
This is a production of the Ultimate Homeschool Radio Network. Welcome to the Vintage Homeschool Mom Show. Your host, Felice Gerwitz, is an author, a publisher, and your radio show host. She will encourage, educate, and inspire you with answers to your most pressing questions, from homeschool, marriage, parenting, and much more. Felice loves to equip moms to live a Christian life because every moment counts. Be sure to visit her website at mediaangels.com. And here's your host, Felice Gerwitz.
Hey friends, and welcome. My name is Felice Gerwitz, and we are here with another episode of Vintage Homeschool Moms. This is episode 542, and our topic today is Education at Home, Making It Easy with Sam Sorbo. Welcome, Sam.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Well, I'm excited. I just wanted to, welcome you to this show. And I have known about you. Obviously, you have a presence as an actress and married to Kevin Sorbo, but I did not know you were a homeschool advocate. So share a little bit about yourself and how you got on our block, because I've been doing this. Well, I clocked in at 32 years. When I ended my homeschool journey with my 5 kids, and I started as an educator and never thought I would homeschool. In fact, I think I talked at least 2 people out of it. Never thought that everyone should homeschool, but as I have looked at what is going on in our world, and sometimes I feel like I'm the only one on the street corner going, people, wake up. I just feel that there is such a need for homeschool advocates. So welcome to the club, and, just share how you got involved with this.
Yeah, so I had 3 kids, and my oldest went to first and second grade in the cute little public school where we moved because that was the good public school system, the best one around in LA. And towards the end of second grade, I was getting just completely disillusioned with what was happening. And I will tell you, it wasn't even that bad. It just wasn't that good. And I was looking at what they were teaching and the work that he was being asked to do and some of the other stuff that was happening. And I was just saying, this is not education. They're not educating him. They're training him. He's picking up some bad habits. He's, picking up some bad things as opposed to picking up good things. And the more I looked into it, the less enamored I was of the entire paradigm. And I finally said to my husband, I think I could fail at homeschooling him and he'll still be better off. In other words, because they weren't accomplishing the academics that I held out as being education, those academics, because they weren't accomplishing that, I was like, so what is the point? And, a lot of people immediately, when you refute the academics, when you say they're not teaching your child to do math, they're not teaching your child the stuff that you're thinking they should be teaching. So why are you so, devoted to sending your child to school? They shift to, well, socialization. Well, my child needs to make friends, which of course is absurd because the child in school is told to stop talking to other children.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like we think that we socialize in school,
Right.
but the fact is the only reason that we think we socialize in school is because that's the only opportunity we have been given.
Right. And that's the thing. I think if you really thought about the paradigm as an adult and considered it, like my son was speech delayed, and we went to a really high end preschool, like because they taught academics. And the doctor told me, well, he needs to go to a preschool because he needs to learn to speak from other children. And this doctor was a friend of ours, and we were at a cocktail party once, and I just kind of sided up to him, and he didn't roll his eyes, but I was one that took the paper out of my pocket and said, okay, I have these questions. And he goes, oh, Felice, you were an educator. You're just looking for things. And I said, well, let's look at this logically. He's going to learn language from a 4-year-old as opposed to adults. You know, it didn't make sense. And so I always was questioning, but I didn't quite understand how we've been duped. And I think that's the thing that a lot of parents, when they find out, you know, I call it the veil of
Yes.
COVID. You know, once that veil was brought back
pierced.
and they were just like, oh my gosh, then
Yeah.
it was a whole new thing. But you have written a book called The Parent's Guide to Homeschooling. And I want to send those listeners to sorbostudios.com to get more information. But I loved it. I got a review copy. And what I loved about it is that you weren't just talking to me about what I should be doing. You're saying, consider these things and write them down. And, you know, like what's important to you as a parent. And I love that. And I think it's one, you know, I've seen a lot of things in my many years of homeschooling. Okay. But I just loved that approach, that you weren't just saying, look, I'm the authority, you know, I've got these credentials. So what made you think of doing it that way?
Exactly what you said prior to this, which is, how did we get duped?
Right.
How are we so duped that we naively subscribe to the idea that other children will teach my children better than I can?
Mm-hmm.
Right? I mean, that's really
Right.
what they're saying is other children will teach your child to be social better than you can. Other children will teach your speech delayed child to speak better than you can. Right? That's the dupe. That's the great, ruse that's been pulled on us. And I will tell you why. The reason is we all went to school. So we have all been brainwashed. I mean, I don't know what else you want to call it. K through 12, 13 years of schooling that trains us to believe that school is good. It's really quite simple. If school is good, then no criticism of the school can stand. And in fact, we've internalized this lesson so much. And so I'm challenging your audience now, and maybe you, I don't know, to think about where are your failures, okay? And where your failures are, I guarantee you attribute your failures to yourself, not the school. So I can't do math. I just don't have a math brain. Not my school, the way that my school taught math was not adequate to teach me math. It's my fault. I don't have a math brain because school good don't challenge that.
Right.
Right. But contrarily, if you're a really good writer, oh, my writing teacher in 11th grade was so awesome. She really taught me a lot about how to write. That's why I'm such a good writer. We credit the school because school good. So it's confirmation bias to like the nth degree. And we don't know that we're doing it because we've been so indoctrinated or brainwashed by our own schooling. And so I took that because, look, I've been on this road for a long time. I've been an advocate. I've been trying to convince parents that they are enough and that God gave them their children for a purpose and all of this stuff, right? And it's very hard for them to step outside the school good paradigm, we'll call it, the brainwashing that they've undergone. The way to do that is by filling in blanks, by really thinking. And in order to write, you have to engage your brain, and your brain engages your hand. And so that's a learn, right? They do this to us in school.
Right.
Why wouldn't I do that to the parents who I want to convince that they are capable? And why do they think they're not capable? Because they grew up in the school good paradigm. And the school good paradigm teaches several things. And one of the things that it trains us in is our own ineptitude. So if you didn't get a gold star on, or an A plus on that, whatever the assignment was, then you are inept. You can't do it. And none of us went to school to teach our children. So we are
Right.
all inept at
Well,
teaching children,
I
right?
did. I'm an educator. That's what they taught us to do.
Oh, yeah, fair enough.
They taught us, and I also have a minor in specific learning disabilities, but they taught us to teach to their strengths. But if you have a disability or a learning difference, I like to call it, they don't teach you how to fix the deficit. So when you get into the real world, and I was in a department of special, needs teachers, it was just a money-making machine. I want to piggyback on something you said. At homeschool conferences, I used to say, I hate science. I hated science as a kid. I hated science as a, as a student, in college even. I hated science as a homeschool mom, but I learned to love science because of my kids. My speech delayed child absolutely loved it. Well, what does science teach? Inquiry. It doesn't have a set answer. It's discovery. You have to have a hypothesis. And he flourished with that concept. And I thought, well, let me look at this. And I wrote the first book, Teaching Science and Having Fun. The point being that, like you said, I thought I was horrible at science. Actually, I thought I didn't really think I was horrible at. I just thought I didn't like it. It's not interesting. It's boring. So that's exactly what you're saying, that we have to look at things from the perspective of what have we been taught and what do we believe. There are some good teachers, and the system in itself, I will say, is not conducive for education. It just isn't. So, in the least. So,
I love how you just sort of drop bombs and then move on.
Well, yeah, I know. We just go on because we can develop that. We'd be here all day, and we don't want our listeners to be here for hours. But
well,
so you took your.
If you don't mind,
No,
the system is not conducive to education. In fact, the system does everything but educate. It's actually anti-education. It discourages learning. It discourages inquiry. Which is the backbone of learning is inquiry, right? Children are super curious, and they get to school and they're told to sit down and shut up and stop asking questions, right? And so it's not just, it's really not the best place. It's basically the worst place for a child to go to learn. Now, that said, maybe 10% of children are actually served by a very structured school type environment. I wouldn't say the schools today actually adhere to that type of environment,
right?
But I will say that sort of the school paradigm where the teacher stands up at the front and lectures to the students, and the students basically don't open their books because the teacher tells them everything that's in it. There are a couple,
right.
10% maybe of the population that will respond to that and thrive in it. But what are we doing with the other 90%? And, you talk about a learning disability. When I hear the word learning disability, I immediately go to, oh, great. What are the strengths?
Right.
Where is the upside? Because there's always an upside. It's not just, oh, you're deficient. Well, full stop. You're deficient and you're just going to have to make up for that. No, typically there are upsides. So dyslexic children typically outperform other people in, I think it's math and engineering. So there's like a majority of dyslexic individuals in the engineering sciences. Go figure, right? And so I struggle so much with a system that seeks to adversely label children, right? And
you
not
have to for the federal funding, So come on, Sam, our priorities is money. And so that would be what they're looking at. Two, but I want to go back to there aren't always horrible teachers, because a situation happened. I only lasted in the school system 2 years because I was a windmill tilter and didn't fit in to their paradigm. But when I was a student teacher, I had 4 gifted kids in my traditional 4th grade class. These kids would ask me these questions and I would be like, I don't know. So I'd say, great question. Let me give you a pass to to the library. And I always talked about my 4 brilliant boys. They were just unbelievable. Like, I would just be like, gosh, that is such a great question. I don't know. And so I sent them to the library a lot. I told the librarian ahead of time, these kids just need to, and they'd come back and tell us what they learned. So they fast forward, my husband had to have, praise God, he took care of it, but he almost needed some kind of neck surgery. It turns out that God fused his vertebrae together where this doctor would have had to fuse his vertebrae. In the x-rays, he's like, oh, I don't need to do anything. It's already fused. So that was a miracle. But this doctor kept looking at me and saying, I know you. And I'm thinking, I don't know you, but I had looked him up previously, because of course we do, right, Sam? If we're going to go see somebody, we're going to research them. And it turns out he's from Winter Haven, the town I used to live in as a teacher for 1 year. And then I said, oh, you went to Winter Haven, you went to Winter Haven High. And he goes, yes. And so we started talking, and it turns out he was one of my 4 brilliant boys in my class. And he's like, oh my gosh, we loved you. He goes, we wanted to marry you. And they always wrote me these I love you notes. It's only a 4. And so I got to, and he was telling me what happened to the other 4 that they still kept in touch with. And I felt like that's why the Lord had me there at that brief moment in time, was to encourage them, because he said we were so bored until we came, after your class. So I just, now we have these opportunities, but people are afraid to homeschool, Sam. So they're going to look at it and say, well, you can do this, you may have the resources. And I always say, if God calls you to this, he will equip you, it's scriptural. So, God doesn't call the equipped, he equips those he calls. So what would you say to those who say homeschooling is just too daunting? I don't think I can do it. I don't know where to start, or,
Well, let's start with the word if.
Okay.
So you said, if God calls you to homeschool. There is no if. The Bible's pretty clear. There's nowhere in the Bible that God says, make sure that your child goes to school. Make sure you find a good school for your child. Make sure you find a good teacher for your child. Nowhere. The God of the Bible calls the parent to educate the children. Full stop. Twice empowers the grandparents to speak into the education of children, but it is the parent's calling to educate the child. In fact, I would say that the child is given to the parents in order for the parents to educate the child, because the parents will learn so much from that process. Mm-hmm. And so I want parents to understand this is job number 1. It's not like down number 5 or 6, make sure you take care of all these other things first. To my mind, the child is the full responsibility of the parents, and God will equip you, because I believe you're correct. God equips those he calls. So then to that end, how do you go about this? And there are lots of different ways to go about the education of your children, which can actually involve you finding somebody to tutor your child in certain disciplines. But the idea that you could somehow offload the responsibility of educating your child to some other entity is anathema to me. You're missing out on the very best part of parenting. And as a result, you will miss out on the relationship that you could have with the child that you gave birth to, which is, in my mind, it's a disaster that I don't think people appreciate, because we've been so culturized to just offload our kids. We live in let me say this, we live in a current culture that hates children.
Well, I agree with that. Yeah.
If you love children, you know that you're running somewhat against culture, but I'm not sure that we appreciate to what degree the culture really hates children. We're starting to see it now. We're starting to wake up. Certainly after COVID, and we saw the disastrous things that they were doing with kids in school during COVID and post-COVID. I'll tell you a quick story. A friend of mine's child goes to a very well-respected public school in Virginia, I think. And right after COVID started, like a month or two in, the school got together and the principal assembled a whole compilation of videos from all the teachers so that they could send it to the parents and the kids could like, oh, there's my teacher, there's Mrs. Brock, there's Mr. Levitt, whatever. Every teacher and the principal all did like a 1 minute, 1.5 minute video. Not a single educator mentioned anything about education in a half-hour video sent to the parents to show the children. Not a single educator, I watched the entire thing, mentioned anything about the education of the children.
What did they say?
They said, I'm walking my dog. Make sure you wash your hands. I hope I see you really soon. This is my dog, Fluffy. He likes cheese. We give him cheese. Like, just blather. Nobody cares about the education of the child. I'm just going to, I'm emotional because it infuriates me. Not a single teacher said anything, and it could have been anything. I would have taken, hey, remember, study your sight words, or remember, do your spelling homework. Hey, don't forget, we're in the middle of Gulliver's Travels. You can ask your mom and dad to read a little bit to you, like anything for elementary kids. They don't give a flip. They're there for, I'm sorry, these people in particular. I'm not saying all teachers, but I'm not saying not all teachers. You know what I'm saying? Like this is scary to me that you've got 30 people who are all working together in an elementary school, and not a single one of them thinks to task the children who are home for COVID for an indefinite amount of time. You would think somebody might come up with the bright idea of, hey, maybe the kids should just keep up on their homework a little bit. What if we sent them a science video to watch? Also, I don't know anything. They don't care. That much is evident.
Well, the outcomes that are supposed to be there are a failure if you look at what they are. When I wrote my Teaching Science and Having Fun book, I wanted to scope and sequence. I had to call somebody. Kathy Duffy does Kathy Duffy reviews. And so she's a friend of mine. So I called Kathy back before we had text messages. And I said, where can I look for a good scope? And she said, look for California at the time, Virginia, and what was the other? I don't even remember what the other state was, because Florida was so fluff.
Ohio.
And I had to take those three and compile them together to get something that was solid about just give me an idea, because we liked unit studies back then. We couldn't find curriculum when I started. And so I wanted to find something that would say, oh, like in kindergarten, make sure they understand such and such. And there was nothing. And so that's why so many of us started writing curriculum, because there wasn't anything to do. I just interviewed Kathy last week, and she's working with her grandchildren and writing a worldview curriculum. And I'm like, Kathy, get that out on, we need it. And she said, oh no, it's just for my grandchildren. And she wrote something for her kids too. I'm gonna nag her about it, because I'm sure it would be wonderful if she did it. But the point being, again, that we as parents have that opportunity to talk to our kids and say, what are you interested in? I would sit my children down. I had one interested in the stars and one interested in oceans. I'm like, could we not pull it a little bit closer? But what did we do that year, Sam? Because they were young and little, and we went to the Kennedy Space Center is in Florida, and then we went to the aquariums, and then we wrote about it. My kids still tease me about that when everybody's home at Christmas time, and they're like, don't say anything to mom about an interest. She'll make you write a book, or have you. They used to have them write little books, because a little book's fun, and it's not a paper, right? Because you have your pictures and a few little words and captions, and my kids are so funny, but they all want to homeschool. So even my daughter, who's currently at a private Christian school, and she loves her job and she loves the community there. I'm going to throw her under the bus here, but she wants to homeschool her children when she has them someday. She just got married. So you know, that to me is a legacy. You know, we have been able to pass on something to our children that, you know, I feel like my parents weren't able to pass on to me, but my parents educated me in so many different ways. When I
Yes,
went to
because
kindergarten, I did not know anything about Sleeping Beauty or Cinderella. I'm Italian. My grandmother told me Bible stories. I knew about the apostles. I knew about Adam and Eve and Noah and the ark. And, you
right.
know, so my mother came back, you know, saying those stupid Americans, she was a citizen, but she just was, you know, livid that the teacher was so upset that I didn't know who the beauty queens were. So it's just, I think as parents, like you said, we need that
And she left you
responsibility.
there.
Oh, I know.
That's the funny
But
part,
they're
right?
homeschooling, yes, but I'm ancient, you know, so homeschooling at that point was not even a thought
Yes,
because
okay.
they,
And here's the thing. I'm
yeah,
not,
right,
this isn't a judgment of your mother in
right.
particular. My
Right.
point is the school itself is a grand experiment. We
Oh, it
never
is.
had school before. We've had it
Yeah, if you
for a
look at
little
it
over 100
historically.
years.
Yeah,
This is the experiment, okay? The founders, the geniuses who created this nation were all self-taught, all homeschooled, all of them. And so for us to think like we have it's such hubris to think somehow that this is what's getting it right finally, when we have these geniuses who came before who
right,
accomplished tremendous things and were self-taught. And yet when you see, you know, we have so many examples of kids, of individuals who dropped out and became enormously successful by the standards of the schools, okay?
right,
And the school standards are not good standards for success, but they are the standards that our culture has adopted now because we all went to school. So my point is, you know, your mother, bless her heart, she put you in school, but she was pissed off that they thought that she hadn't done an appropriate job, rather than say, no, school, you're just dead wrong. And you know what? I don't know why I'm
she
leaving
did.
my daughter with you,
She
right?
did tell them that, knowing my
But
mother.
my point is, at that
Right,
point, you
right.
say,
Yeah,
why am I allowing these people to
right,
speak into my daughter's life, her formation, her education, when they are idiots? And I think they're idiots, right? And so
right,
it takes a certain backbone. That's actually what my book tries to do, is give you the backbone to say, you know what? Those people are they're not more clever than I am.
right,
They know how to manage classrooms. I don't need to know that. Like, yes, they got a degree in classroom management. I don't need to know that. What I need to know is, what are my child's interests and how do I feed those? And you know what? You can find out how to feed those interests so that your child becomes self-taught and driven. And my point is, the curiosity will drive your child as long as you keep feeding it and you don't put up roadblocks. So feed the curiosity, get out of the way, and allow that child the child will exceed your expectations if you just get out of the way and stop trying to apply this rubric that
right.
some torturous guy designed in the 1800s to apply to children. Do you see what I'm saying?
I know it's like
How they
I'm
came up
trying
with
not.
move to the
Okay,
sound of a
I'm
bell?
trying not to laugh here because that's
The way
hilarious.
that they came up
Yeah,
with,
true.
let's ring a bell for the kids to move from classroom to
Yeah,
classroom, that's factory. That's
you're right,
factory training. Let's train
right,
those kids to work on the factory floor so that they will be obedient, not ask questions, and do what they're told. Because look, Rockefeller and the rest of them wanted good factory workers. My point is, we're entering a new era, okay? We don't need factory workers. I mean, sure, there are factory jobs, and we're going to try to bring some factory jobs back to the United States now. But you can work in a factory and still be able to ask questions and stuff. The problem is, we're entering a whole new era. We need outside the box thinkers. We need creative thinkers.
right.
We need problem solvers. And you don't get problem solvers from the institutional path that we have erected now. Your
So,
children, if they go on this institutional path, which is, you know, preschool, grade school, middle school, high school, college, maybe even PhD or master's, that is not an outside the box thinker. In fact, those people are the least creative thinkers that we have.
So the new brand of child is very connected. And I would think, just talking to you a little bit, I don't really know you, that you're probably not one that give your children cell phones at, 2 and 3 years old. So I have been big on disconnecting. You know what I mean? Like I call them devices. Even my adult kids come in, nobody's allowed to. We're watching a movie, everybody's back home. Even when they were home, everybody, they would text each other. Our house, we have a large house, and and I would say, what are you doing? I'm texting my brother upstairs. Nobody's texting anybody. Go upstairs, run up the stairs. It's good exercise. I live in a family of athletes. I'm the only unathletic person. So it was amazing that I would talk to other moms, and they're like, well, at conference, I would speak, and people are, well, how do you get your kids to get off the phone? And I said, my kids didn't have cell phones until they were driving age, and they played sports and were on a bus. And my kids did some dual enrollment, and my son had to call me outside of the classroom. He was 15 at the time. And, Mom, what's the password on my phone? I can't get on the internet. The professor wants us to look up something. And I told him, and I said, when you get home, he goes, I know, you're going to put another one on. My kids just knew. There wasn't any discussion. There wasn't any argument. It was our family rules.
We don't know how to parent anymore. This is what is, super fun. In fact, I would say a lot of my book has to do with parenting, even more than sort of education. It's parenting because parenting is education for the child. Mm-hmm. Proper parenting is the education of the child. By the way, I did it wrong, and I freely admit this. I totally schooled my first two. It wasn't until my third taught me that she was her own teacher that I finally figured it out. And man, that was a relief of a burden on me. But then again, I did it sort of wrong with the first two. Trust me, they turned out fine. But if I had it to do over again, and this is what I train parents in, I wouldn't do it as onerously.
So are you talking about like unschooling? Is that your? I'm not. Would you put it?
What I am saying is that I was so devoted to the academics that I lost sight. But still, they were done with school by noon or 1 o'clock every day.
That's how my kids were
a large
too,
part.
Yes.
And so that still allowed them for a great deal of freedom, which is why they turned out so great. It's the freedom that you give the child within the parameters, right? So your parameters were no cell phones or all of that tech stuff. And I support that. My children each got a phone on their 13th birthday. And I wouldn't do that again. I think that was a mistake. There's far too much predation on the internet against children. And so I would not do that again. But there are ways to parent where you lay down the ground rules and you are not contested, because you don't send your child to another authority and tell the child that's the authority, which is what happens when you send your child to a school. You're giving the child over to another authority, and you're broadcasting to the child that your authority no longer counts because it's the school's authority that is in charge.
The teacher said this. Well, the teacher said I had to do it this way, or the teacher said, yeah.
And you can't challenge that because you've already ceded your authority. If you don't cede your authority, but you still have to exert authority. I went to a little birthday party with my toddler and my I guess my son was maybe 4, and I was tired. I really didn't need to be there. And it was a fabulous party. It was one of these really fancy parties. There was a lot going on. It was very exciting. And we walked in, and I was standing there with the mom who had 4 kids, or 5 kids, I think. And my little boy walked over to a kiddie chair there were 2 kiddie chairs with a kiddie table, and he knocked over the kiddie chair. He just knocked it over. And I looked at him and I said, Braden, pick that up. And he turned to me and he said, no. I said, oh, you want to go home? And he immediately turned and picked up the chair. And what was weird is the woman who's throwing the party, she didn't know me that well. We had just become acquainted. She lived down the street from me. But she said to me, oh, I guess making good on your threats actually pays off. as if she knew. And of course, it was obvious by the
Right.
tone of my voice. We would turn around and leave if he didn't
Right.
do the right thing. And
Yeah.
it doesn't take more than that. Kids get it. They're like, oh, you're the authority. I get it. Okay, so I can only push this far and not farther.
Like, yeah, my
But if
husband
you
calls
don't,
kids gamblers, that they're going to gamble,
yes,
that you're not going to follow through. You know, they're going to
yes,
try it again. It's not like your son was
no,
perfect after that. He's
exactly.
going to try it again, but he
And the
knows,
first time you
right?
don't follow through,
Right.
you've lost a
Yes.
lot. So you have to follow
Yeah.
through. And so
Yeah,
one of
true.
the things I tell parents is be prepared to have to
Right.
follow through. So I've made consequences. One time I made a consequence that punished me also. Like if I had
I've done
wanted
that.
to stay at the party, I would not have threatened him with leaving the party. But I didn't
Got it.
care. So I was so, and that time it paid off anyway, and I had to stay at the party. But I did make a consequence once where I was also punished. And after I realized that I had to enforce the consequence, I was like, dang it, I punished myself also,
Yeah.
So
But it's worth it in the long run. So,
absolutely.
5 kids, they're all different. My daughter has 9. They're all different. Every
Wow.
single child has their own personality. And yet, when we've gone out for dinner and there's a big group of us, we call ahead, and people will come up to us as they're leaving, Sam, and say, people look at me, I don't know, like I'm an authority figure. Little kids come up to me when we're out and they'll ask me a question. It's just like, do I have this face that I know the answer? And so they'll say to me, the kids were so well behaved, we were really worried. And so one of the kids, as we were leaving, goes, Grandma, they don't know that you threaten us that you're not taking us out again. I just say to them before we go, everyone's going to be great. And, my daughter's, she speaks to them very sweetly, and she speaks to them like they're adults. And
Yes.
so, and she homeschools. But I always was so amazed, like the little one, it's 4 years old, and Mom, did you bring my sippy cup? No, I asked you to get it. And they were saying, well, you didn't bring it? And she said, no. And the little one quipped, well, that wasn't thinking of others, and walked away, did not have a sippy cup. And the mom, we're all like trying to not laugh because how hilarious. And she must have said, well, that's not thinking of others. So she said, come back here. And she said, and they went through their whole little, and I just said to my husband, that's too many words. I would just be like, no, so people parent differently. And I've had to really appreciate how my daughter parents, because her children have this huge vocabulary and they listen, but it's more of a roundabout than what I would do. And so she's gone through different ways of homeschooling. And I think that's important too, Sam. So, people will say, well, I have 2 kids or I have 3 kids. You don't necessarily need to homeschool them all the same way. It's easier, but give us some insight there, because I know we've gotten completely off of our track of our notes here. I've loved this because it's been great. And I have to say, we need more people like you, because I feel like I'm, slowly exiting with my, episode 542, it's like I've already said a lot. And I'm so thrilled to meet you, because now this new generation of moms and those who have a platform, people are going to listen to you perhaps a little bit more than they listened to me at the beginning, so
I will say
it's important.
shifted. It's definitely shifted, because as I've grown and understood more, my message has gotten more advanced, let's say. And I would say a couple years ago, people couldn't hear my message. I used to joke that I wrote a great book for homeschoolers, but the problem was that the homeschoolers already knew what my book was like. They got my book. They didn't need my book. The people who needed my book didn't want my book, right? Because they didn't want to homeschool, even though they should. Now, I will tell you, last week, I did 2 speaking engagements, middle of the country. And the reception that I'm getting, and my message has gotten more fervent, right? Mm-hmm. Stronger. The reception of it is much more embracing. as opposed to this sort of like, well, I get it. For some people, it's good, but it's not really for me. My kid goes to a good school, all of these sort of, well, I don't know. Now it's like, tell me more because I see it too. And that's exciting for me. I think we are slowly waking up to the idea that our schools are a great experiment that we are guinea pigs in, and it didn't work. It was a bad experiment. We shouldn't do it again. And parents are understanding the war on children that's happening, and they're going, wait a minute, I'm not going to sacrifice my child in that war, which is good. So when you talk about educating different children differently, it's a little bit of no duh. Like, of course, different children learn differently. And you know this because you were a child and you learned differently than your friends learned, even though you were all schooled the same way, perhaps, right? So when it comes to your children or your each child, you have to approach them differently. Now, if you want them to understand English grammar, then you get a good grammar curriculum and you apply it. But education is not data entry. Education is a software download. So English grammar is just some data entry, and that's part of it. You want the data in there, but it's more importantly the software download, and that's you, right? You're the parent. You're the curriculum for your children. So you can apply some curricula, I should say, and that's great. But when parents ask me, like, what curricula do you advocate for? And by the way, I do have some curricula that I like, that I advocate for because parents need to feel like they're doing something. But I want parents also to understand that just sitting down and having a nice conversation with your children or with your child about the political events of the day is education.
Right.
Taking your child to the bank and teaching them how to make a deposit is education. Showing them how to open the door for somebody properly is also education. So don't think, if I just buy the right curricula and download it, boom, I've done my job, because that's not what it is. And that's what the schools have led us to believe. They've led us to believe that education is all academic. And by the way, now the schools are not academic at all. They're all the DEI, CRT, gender bending theories, right?
Yeah.
And so now you see that even they believe that education is indoctrination. They believe that education is doctrine. And it's the software that they're installing in these young malleable minds. They're installing a very perverted, terrible software these days. So if you can at least prevent your child from that, you will be ahead of the curve. And
right,
your children
and that's
will
why
love you for it.
I'm, as much as I'm podcasting, I'm on social media. I am an advocate of not having your kids have the devices, because I feel like that has sucked the life out of our younger children. They don't know how to play. They don't know how to interact. That's number one. The second thing is, and so I don't know a lot, again, about what you think about this, but I've talked to parents who have said, well, my kids don't really, we have instantaneous calculators on our phones. We can spell check. We can voice to text. We've got AI. And that just makes me, the concept of AI, to write a paper. So my daughter, in her private Christian school, she was paying for it on her own, and she finally convinced the school to get it. It's the software that catches plagiarism. Okay, yeah. So a lot of the colloquialisms are going to be flagged as plagiarism. So there, you have to realize that. But you can see when huge chunks are highlighted that they've completely lifted it. And I am very opposed. Even my social media girl knows I don't want a lot of that used for blog posts and things like that. So I think that parents have to realize that there is this huge world in which we live, and it's a digital world, but it has to be looked at very carefully, because a lot of people think AI is wonderful. It is, to a degree. I mean, basically computer software is intelligent, if you want to say that, except when it does spell check and it's wrong. It's not, I mean, that's not what I was trying to say. Quit trying to change it. So, because we do use the software to catch, I over punctuate. So, but the point being, Sam, address this new world in which we live, where you can get any curriculum you want. You can find any school online you want. You can buy into the public school at home. And you can also take government dollars. That was one of the things Kathy and Kathy wrote a groundbreaking book, and I talk about it in the other podcast, but I found it when I was cleaning, and I text her and say, okay, we've got to do a podcast. She wrote a book in 1995. Think about how old you were, Sam, at the time. And I was already, I started homeschooling in 1986. I'm dating myself. And I bought so many copies of this book, and I must have still had one. It was called Government Nannies. And she talked about outcome education that was coming in the year 2000. And she was a visionary. I mean, she had some scenarios in this book, and she goes, well, what are we going to talk about? And I said, you're going to tell everybody I told you so. She's so sweet. She's like, I'm not going to say that. But the point being that in 1995, and probably way earlier than that, this was already happening. This was already on the agenda to take the minds and hearts of our children. And I feel that parenting in this new world, this new generation that we live in, is a little bit more difficult than what I had to go through, because I didn't have to keep my kids off the computer. Everybody didn't have laptops.
Right.
We didn't all have cell phones.
Well, the good thing is, I think the pendulum is swung back. So this new generation, I just was listening to a podcast this morning, and a guy is being indicted, and the press is coming after him, and terrible things are happening to him, and his career is at stake because people have made up stuff. And so he had to go talk to his grown kids and say to them, young adults, basically, and say, this stuff, you're going to be hearing this stuff. It's not true. But I figured I should talk to you about it. And they said to him, but we don't listen to the media.
I just heard that same interview. We'll talk about that off air.
We're not.
I know what you're saying. Yeah.
So the young people and young men, particularly, in fact, in this last election, men voted in droves. They are not the voters typically. It's typically the women that are the voters. They vote more than men, but the men came out because the men are understanding that masculinity is under attack. And at the same time, sort of on a parallel track, parenting is under attack, children are under attack, and people are now reverting. So children, young people getting off their phones because they understand there's predators out there on purpose. Mm-hmm. Looking for them and their naivete, and they are not that naive, and so they're getting off their devices. So my advice or my input here is, you think that device is helping, but it's not. It's a brain freeze. It's a brain suck. And so, to a parent who says, but my child can use the calculator and can use the spell checker. Oh, so you don't want your child to be able to use their brain. Because what you're saying is you're going to replace the brain work that your child could learn to do with this. And what I'm saying is, when they get older, their brain simply won't work. In fact, we have, the studies prove it. If you do a crossword puzzle every day, you will avoid senility. If you work your brain just a little bit, then you postpone the degradation of your brain as you age.
Exactly.
And so why are you going to start the degradation of your child's brain early as opposed to postponing it? Grow a backbone, be a parent, and put limitations on. And the best limitation is they don't get a smartphone. They don't get a smartphone until they're, let's say, 16 or 18, or maybe just not. Maybe by the time they get there, the zeitgeist will be this realization that these things are just not that helpful.
A lot of parents are going.
I'm a hypocrite because I couldn't function without my smartphone, but I know that it was not advantageous entirely. Sure, there are some advantages, but the downsides they far outweigh the advantages of giving children smartphones. And there's a researcher who talks about this. His name is escaping me. But he says you can create a group that decides these things. So your group can decide for, say, the school, and then you convince the school to have a no cell phone policy, or your friend group, your homeschool group. You get all the parents to agree, hey, we're going to do a no cell phone policy. And that way, I don't have to worry that my kid goes to your kid's house, that your kid might have a cell phone that I don't have control over.
Exactly.
Right?
Yes.
And kids will find ways. We're not going to parent perfectly, but we can certainly try. And the effort
that's
is
the
worth
best we can do.
Yeah, exactly.
You've said that if homeschooling is hard, you're doing it wrong. What do you mean by that?
So education is easy. Learning is fun. And so if you're not having fun and it's not easy, then you must be doing it wrong, because learning is fun. Kids love to learn. Kids love to learn.
They do.
The thing that we have to understand is the schools pervert the learning experience and make it yucky, so that kids no longer want to learn. I don't know about you, but when I graduated high school, well, okay, I didn't graduate, but when I left high school, I never wanted to crack another book. And I was on my way to college, and I had no desire to learn anything ever again. You know, it's like this, oh, thank goodness school is over. That's a bad sentiment. That sentiment should not be tolerated, right?
Yeah.
Also, homework should not be tolerated by parents. You have my child for 7.5 hours a day. If you can't get your job done in that time, then you're fired.
We're kindred. I never gave my students homework, and they loved me. I want to just piggyback on something you were saying about the parenting aspect. We are not called to be our parents' friends. That's not what God has called us to. When you talk, right? That's what I say. My parents. Yeah, thank you. And so a lot of times parents will say, well, I don't want to be so strict because I don't want my kids to grow up hating me. They won't. They will respect you. And respect is earned. If they understand, you know, this is how mom is. My grandchildren respect me. They come over and I will say things to them like, you really need to love your mom, because, you know, you need to be thankful that you have the mom you have, because grandma wouldn't do that, would I? And they will tell me exactly how I would, you know, parent differently, and just kind of, you know, laugh it off. But to be a good parent means not only sticking up for what you believe, but also loving your children so much that you are going to do the hard thing, that you are going to punish yourself. One time I told my daughter, who was really good, this is the one with all the children, who loves people. She loved, you know, she was a people person. She was so overly socialized as a homeschool child. I can't even imagine her in the system, because she was a communication major in college. And so she would manipulate me into allowing her to homeschool or to spend the night at a friend's. And I didn't like the whole spend the night thing anyway. And I finally just said no. And then she puts the mom on the phone. And I have to say to my friend, can I get back with you? Because she had manipulated the whole situation where now the mom's asking me. And so I said to my daughter, I am so upset with you that I don't know exactly what I'm going to punish you with, but I'm going to think about it and pray about it. And at first, you know, my kids used to scoff. They didn't. It only took one time, Sam. I punished her for 1 year of no spending the night. And I didn't talk to my husband about it, and all, you know, probably wasn't the wisest idea, because he said, wasn't that a little bit harsh? And I said, maybe. But the more I thought about it, I needed to teach her like 2 times or 3 times. I mean, what is the limit of no spending the night? That what's going to make an impact. So anyway, end of story. This was the shining example of, look at what happened to Christina. And do you think that, like it was like, this could happen to you too. So you need to be good, kind of a thing. Like the parents were using that situation as, an extreme example of a parenting, not that my friends were saying it was horrible that I did it. They were actually in my corner and saying, oh my gosh, I don't think I could have done that because, my kids love it so much. And I think sometimes in parenting that we don't do things that are beneficial for our children because we're more upset than they are. they'll get over it. Believe me, it's harder for us than it is for them.
That is such a good point, right? That we're so upset on their behalf that we can't abide the consequences ourselves because, oh my gosh, it's going to be so hard for them. But I want to speak specifically to the sleepovers. I know we have like a minute left, but I want to speak specifically to the sleepovers. I do not condone sleepovers ever, not a single time. And I would empower the parents who are listening to tell their children they wish they could, but they won't sleep well and they need their own sleep, and therefore they can't allow a sleepover. I don't believe in sleepovers. I think they can be very nasty. You do not know what is happening. It is not your home. And so
I really like you, Sam. You're awesome.
Worse now than it ever was.
Oh yeah.
And so the punishment being a year of no sleepovers is like, yeah, of course. Like that's all, it should have been never a sleepover.
Well,
again.
she outgrew it at that point. Yeah, she outgrew it at that point.
But you're right. You hadn't drawn that line. I drew that line, and eventually my family wore me down when my kids were much older, and I still regret it. I won't go into the specifics, but something happened that was not good, and I should have never given up that beachhead. And so that's why.
But God gives us that. God gives us that discernment, Sam. God gave you and that discernment to say, no, I don't want to do it. And yes,
but some people lack discernment, right? True. And so here's God. Okay. I'm channeling God. Here you go.
Yeah, true.
I'm telling you, just don't do it. Just know our policy is no sleepovers because mommy needs her sleep. And mommy's not going to sleep well if you're at somebody else's house. It's just the way it works. And that's it. There's no discussion, right? There's no, we're done.
What are your last thoughts? Let's circle around and tie this thoughts.
I really encourage everybody to get my book. It's a lot of fun. It'll bring into your mind what you really want out of life with your children, which is an important thing to think of. We are not taught to think of it because the culture hates children. And so you're taught that your children are a burden. And I stand against that. And I encourage you to really give some thought. What do you want to have with your children when they're grown that you can start cultivating now? That's what homeschooling is. That's what, and I don't like homeschooling, like I say home education. That's what education is, right? And so that's what I encourage you to do. Go to sorbostudios.com for all the information, also to reach out to me. And you can join my locals community, samsorbo.locals.com, where we have this conversation a lot, like with other parents and stuff. So you can bring your issues and we'll hash it out online.
Wonderful. Well, I loved meeting you. We're kindred.
Me too.
And I think this is great. So I follow you on X and I followed Kevin for a really long time. He's a hoot on X.
Yeah, you did.
You never know what he's going to say.
Yeah.
I'm really happy to be back over there. That was actually my one social media I like the most out of any of them because it's short. But anyway, so blessed to have met you. Congratulations on the book. And friends, we'll be back next week with more homeschooling information and fun. Visit me at vintagehomeschoolmoms.com and on social media. Take care. God bless. And I'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.
Thanks for tuning in to the Vintage Homeschool Mom Show. Visit Felice at MediaAngels.com and thevintagehomeschoolmoms.com. Vintage Homeschool Moms is a production of the Ultimate Homeschool Radio Network.